And welcome to another edition of Scott Wheeler's Airplay. This is episode number 30, airing live right now from the Widecast studios in downtown Peoria on Peoria Life's Facebook page. Remember, you can catch this episode, past episodes, and future episodes at Peoria Life's web portal, Peoria Life on Facebook. We have a YouTube channel, which we're streaming live to right now, and our friends over at Peoria TV, channel 17 on the i3 broadband system, Airplay as well. I'm Scott Wheeler from Super Hits WIRL, and Airplay is all about going behind the scenes to meet those radio and television folks who you hear on the air or watch every day, or even some behind the scenes work, which we're going to talk about today. Remember, you can also catch Airplay on Apple Podcasts if you're on the go. There isn't a radio station in Peoria that my guest has somehow not touched in one way or another. I consider him kind of a legend of Peoria radio. We're talking, of course, about Wayne R. Miller, the guest today on Airplay. Welcome, Wayne.
Thank you very much. Good to see you. Good to be here in this lovely studio.
Yes.
Love this.
Enjoy it as well. So I thought I started in radio early at age 15.
I started at 13.
That amazes me. At the iconic WHOW in Clinton,
Illinois.
The Big Red Barn, right?
It wasn't the barn at the time. It was downtown over the bank at the time.
Okay.
So when I started there. But I started, my dad took me down there. We were friends with the manager, and my dad took me down there one day, and Bob Veach, who was the manager, said, hang around here and look and see. And I kind of hung around, and I remember distinctly the smell of the radio station.
Yeah.
You remember probably at 15, it was a combination of warm electronics and cigarette smoke.
Yes.
And a little bit of grease and just
Yes.
just a whole, and occasionally some perfume, and and I remember distinctly walking in there, and I was just like, oh, this is heaven.
I found my people.
So I started hanging around, and you had to have a license at that time to run a radio station. So when I was 13 years old, my dad popped me on a train to Chicago to meet a friend of his. We went to the Dirksen building, and I had my little study guide in my hand and got yelled at for carrying it in the room. And this big redheaded guy gave me this test, and I passed it. So I got my little blue certificate with the third phone and broadcast endorsement.
Yeah.
And one Sunday afternoon, when I was 13, 14, right in that area, a guy by the name of Len Freeman got snowed in and couldn't make it in town to be on the air. Mm-hmm. And he said, hey, that Miller kid's been hanging around. Let him do it. So I went on the air with gospel time at 13 with gospel time and country music, and had a ball all Sunday afternoon, and that was the beginning. And I have been in radio ever since that day.
Was your voice in the pre-13 range or the?
I remember doing commercials for a dry cleaner in Decatur in the gospel show. We had to do the commercials live, and I remember trying real hard to not let it do that. But yeah, it was right at that point.
So did you ride your bike to work?
I did, absolutely. I rode my bike up to the square, went uptown, or went up above the bank, and there was the studio, and so I wound up working Saturday afternoons and Sunday mornings for all through high school at the radio station. But you're exactly right. I had a 10-speed bike, and I would ride uptown, and then later I would drive, but just go up to the studio and have at it.
When your dad took you there, you obviously had an interest already. What started this for you? What captivated you?
Don't really know. I've just had this desire to tinker. I've always been kind of a geek, and building things in the basement and running wires and playing with electric fence batteries and shocking my brother and whatever else I could do. And I just liked the smell of the tubes, and it's a wonder I didn't burn the house down, because I really didn't know what I was doing, but I had a great deal of fun. And I built a lot of these transmitters, broadcast across the room or broadcast to your neighbor's house. Well, you can cover a town with those if you really know what you're doing. Do a little research, and I promptly did. So I had some massive equipment in the basement that would do some really illegal things, but I had a ball with it, and it just, I don't know, it just got in your system, and I could never leave the business ever.
So then off to EIU, my wife's alma mater, so I know much about the radio stations down there.
It's Eastern Illinois University. The same guy that owned, J.R. Livesey owned WHOW in Clinton, and he owned WLBH in Mattoon. So when it was time to go to school, he said, come down, work for me in Mattoon. And I did 7 to midnight on, that was my first introduction to beautiful music.
Yes.
On WLBH FM all night. So I worked 7 to, I think we signed off at 11. Do my homework and then go to school and then come back at 7 and do the same thing and then work weekends. And Ray and I got into a discussion one night when I played a Doc Severinsen song on his FM station too late at night. Now, Doc Severinsen and the Tonight Show band, I didn't really see that was that big of a deal. And Ray just wailed on me for playing that rock and roll music. And I'm like, Ray, it's Tonight. He would not listen to reason. So, station down the road, WEIC in Charleston.
Yes, I remember.
Had just gone top 40 and just gone 24 hours a day. And they also just changed the law so that you could operate a directional AM lower powered with the third phone instead of having to have the first phone.
Right, I remember that.
So at that point in time, there was an opportunity to jump to top 40. So I left Ray, went over there. And Ray and I were great friends even after that. I mean, we still talked with each other, and he sent me Christmas cards. I mean, we had we still had a good relationship. But
did you finish school?
No,
you didn't.
No.
Okay, because I've always had this dilemma. I did. What did you major in?
I was in secondary education.
Really?
I had a teacher's ed scholarship because Eastern was a teacher's university, so to speak, and so I was there and. I went 2 years and was actually doing pretty well. And I got this wild hair one day to send some tapes out. And one of them wound up with WIRL in Peoria.
And so the story goes.
In 1973. And Bill McCluggage, who was the program director there, called me, scared me to death. And he says, why don't you come up and see us? So I got in my Toyota and drove to Peoria. And it's so funny. My daughter and I just got back from a trip to Florida. We were coming in real early in the morning into Peoria on the interstate, and you see the outline of the buildings and the bridge and everything. And I just mentioned to her, I said, that is the scene I saw in 1973 when I drove up here to interview at WIRL. I was 17 years old. So I was 17 or 18. Trying to remember, I couldn't really drink when we went to jock parties. I think I was 18, and drinking age was 21 then. So I said, that's the first scene I saw of Peoria, and it's still beautiful.
It's iconic.
It really is. It really looks great.
Peoria is a real city when you come around that curve.
Well, when you come from Charleston, where there's 11,000 people, including, unless the university's in, and then there's like 20. And you come to Peoria, it's like, oh my God, I have arrived. And I have to say that the money was commensurately larger too. I wasn't getting rich, but it was like, you're going to pay me what?
And I think people don't realize that's 1973. We were talking before we got started. There were essentially 3 AM stations in Peoria at that time, and WIRL was just a monster. You must have felt like you were stepping into the big time.
Oh, I did. I felt like you're moving into... I mean, this is like going from Peoria to, Bob Hale went from Peoria to Chicago when LS first turned. I can imagine what he felt like because it was that kind of a jump to go, just into a huge number of people. And of course, the Metro at that time was growing instead of shrinking. So we were looking at, maybe, I don't remember the exact numbers, but 300,000 for the Metro kind of comes to mind as to what it was totally. And I did overnights for about 6 months, and then they put me in afternoons. And I have Arbitron books that show me with a 67 share 12 plus. So
that's 67% of the people listening to the radio are on
listening to WIRL and to me. And I'm like, holy cow, we were truly gods from a box.
And those numbers are like 5 now.
Oh, yes. Even the best is, you get a 6 or a 7, and you're doing great. You're on top of the world. And at the time, you're right, there were 3 stations. There was WMED AM, WXCL, which was a country station, and WIRL. Now, we had some FMs. WMED FM, I think, was Music for Lovers, as I recall. SWT, which had just been bought by WIRL, because WIRL owned the TV station for a while, and they sold it right before I got here, and used that money to buy WUHN from the Journal Star, which became WSWT, all music all the time, which we also did out on the hill too, by the way. It's kind of a contrast between the two radio stations. But the FM audience it just didn't exist.
Yeah, right.
There was just nobody there. And then it became, I don't know, you were part of the death of AM.
Yes, I know.
as it all came along. Good friend of mine, Brian, such a good friend, I can't remember his name, in Columbus, Ohio, called me on the phone one day, and he says, "Wayne, get out." He said, "We just got our clock cleaned by an FM in one book and didn't even see it coming." He said, "Move on, do something else, but your days are numbered." You know,
we're talking about KZ93.
Right, and then KZ93, which was... it was the Music for Lovers, then it was The Rock. I remember The Rock.
Rock 93,
that's right. And then KZ hit and Top 40, and it was pretty much, a game and set. And then you had CT came along with the album station, and so the market just splintered. But, for that little magical time, and it was from about 1960, I think WIRL went Top 40 pretty much full-blown in the early 60s, 62, 63. And it lasted a good 10 years, into the 73, 74, 75, right in there. And by that time, things had changed, and it's just the evolution of the industry.
So you and I both work at present-day WIRL. I'm so fascinated by its history. What was it like in its heyday? What was the vibe? Is there a story that kind of encapsulates?
We did so many things for the community. And and of course you got the successful Top 40 radio station, and right in the middle of everything, Mort Cantor comes along and does a Bradley basketball game. We always thought that was weird, but you know what? It fit what we were doing, because it fit the lifestyle. The people that listened to Bradley and Mort also liked our radio station. We used to do a thing called the Walk for Mankind, where all the jocks walked for 20 miles to raise money for that charity, and I'm not even sure it even exists anymore in that form. But we went out and everybody walked, and we had a great time. We used to do Operation Santa Claus every year, where we all got together and we hired a Santa Claus, and we took him around to people who we did a lot of charity work, where people who, the kids really wanted to see Santa, but they really couldn't afford anything, and we took them presents and prizes and Santa Claus out to deliver the stuff. And then other people made donations for that. And we would sit in the studio. Robin Weaver and I wound up anchoring that most of the time. So every year Robin and I were in the studio, everybody else was out, and we read the donations, the pledges, and unfortunately we read them pretty much as they came in. And I announced a pledge of, $100 from the Bradley athletic supporters. I thought Weaver was going to die. I thought he was going to fall right off of his chair because I did it so nonchalantly, the Bradley athletic supporters. And he said something about, how's their cups? And it was just, those were really fun nights. But we were a bunch of long-haired hippie jocks. We were all friends with each other. We all hung with each other. A few of us had family here, so we did holidays and things together. But the electricity when you walked into that building and the music, it was just, it is very, very hard to recreate that. Because now, and it was all records. There was not a computer. A computer hadn't been invented yet. So we're playing 45s and albums and smoking cigarettes. Oh my, you'd open the door to the studio and this haze would come out of the room. And, we were pranking each other, and, somebody'd lock somebody in the bathroom while the song was ending. We just did all kinds of little things. Or, the setting the news copy on fire. And then, of course, our news director was Ira Bittner, and our news department was really good. We had 6 or 7 people in the news department.
Wow.
And Ira was iron-fisted. And of course, you had the same thing over at the other place too, over at MBD. They were not as involved with you because of KZ, but still the MBD news. News was important, and and it still is important at WMBD because WMBD now we're all one family instead of competing with each other. I think it's amazing that when I came up here, WIRL had 5 full-time engineers, and I know at your place, you had, because you had the TV station, so that
Right.
changed it a little bit, but at least 4 or 5
Yep.
dedicated just to the radio stations. And so that's 8 between those 2 stations, plus the others that we've all put together. And now I've got 8 radio stations and me.
Yep. Flip.
So I have evolved into and that's part of my, the technical part of me. I've always been a geek. I'm a ham radio operator. I love the technical side of it. And I continue to, I tried to retire in 2000, and a tower fell down in Groveland. And the engineer for and that was at the time when WMBD, WIRL, and WSWT and PBG were coming, and PBG was Big Oldies, I think, at the time.
Yep.
We were coming together, and the tower fell down. And so we're trying to move these radio stations, and Mark Hill called me on the phone, and he said, "Can you help a little bit?" And I went, I really kind of just want to take it easy. Oh, come on, it'll be fun. So that was in 2000. So
20 years later, still having fun.
Marcus since retired. I moved up, taken over everything, and I'm looking around for somebody to replace me, and I'm like, oh my God, there's nobody there.
Call Mark. Want to have some fun. So before we get to the engineering thing, at one point you went to the dark side. In sales and management.
Yeah.
You were a general manager, you were a sales guy. What? Money?
Well, exactly. Here's how I explain it. I became a jock. I became an engineer because I liked to tinker. I became a jock because, quite frankly, the jocks got all the girls. There
yes.
you go. Okay. And then I noticed that the salespeople were making all this money. And I'm like, well, and I got fired from WIRL. I did not notice. I didn't know how it worked. WIRL was part of a chain of radio stations that were looking to advance talent all the time. So they would develop talent someplace and move them up and move in. And they told me one day when they fired me, they said, "Well, here's the deal. We don't want our jocks buying houses and having babies and living in town, because we want you to be trying to go somewhere else. Because if you're going somewhere else, that means that we're going to get the best that you can do, because you're trying to go someplace else." That someplace else would have been Milwaukee. And I did get the call to go to Milwaukee. And it would have been overnights in Milwaukee with a chance for advancement at WOKY, which was the monster in Milwaukee at the time. And I went, gee, I'm doing afternoons here, and I'm going to do overnights up there, and the money's pretty good, but I could, so I turned it down. And the guy, I don't remember the gentleman's name, but he gave me some great advice. He said, I'm just going to tell you something. He says, as you go through life, you'll look up and you'll see these rings that go by, and every once in a while, one of them is gold. He said, you've got a gold ring in front of you right now. Whether you grab it or not is entirely up to you, but you're not going to go to Chicago or California or any place without going through Milwaukee or Columbus or one of these other places. So grab the ring, let's go and get you started. And I often wonder what would have happened. I would have either been in New York, I'd have been a game show host in California, I could have made it to Chicago finally, or I could have been a drunk on the streets of Milwaukee. One of those was going to occur. It didn't turn out too bad, but you got to wonder what would have happened if I'd grabbed that and gone. And because in Milwaukee, they could give me the training that I could never get in Peoria, because that's not what we were geared for. Because they would have trained me in Milwaukee to go on to something even bigger.
Right.
And who knows what would have happened. But it's been a good ride. I've enjoyed it.
So now you're essentially the chief engineer for every radio station you ever worked for.
Pretty much, yeah, pretty much.
So
including, I went to, when I got fired from WIRL, I decided to go into the sales area because they made money. And I went to work for WTAZ 102.3 in Morton at the time, and trained to be a salesperson over there. And then came back from that to WXCL, and then from WXCL back to WIRL and WSWT. And then I wound up being the general manager of WIRL and WSWT. So I just floated around to all these radio stations. And then I got fired from that, and that was when I decided I'm done. I've had it. And I went to work for WYZZ TV for a little while, thinking that would be fun. Oh, it's not. It's not. I'm sorry. Television is so limiting. There's no imagination. It's so structured. And after that, I went back to WWCT.
Right.
Rock 106. I was there for a very long time.
Yeah.
I had a great run there as a salesperson, and we developed the internet there. We developed first websites in Peoria there. Did a lot of stuff. And then it was sold to our good friend Bob Kelly, who had WXCL at the time, and it just all went to hell.
Yeah. There's a legendary story with that, too.
So we wound up, and the legendary story there is Bob defaulted on the agreement to buy the station.
Yep.
So John Simmons and I
stole it back or took it back.
Went out to the transmitter site and we stole it back. We moved the cable, and we moved it at a very opportune point because Bob Kelly, the IDs on all of his stations were, Rock 106, WWCT Peoria, another Kelly communication station. And I had my hand on the connector as the ID went by, and it went another kip. And I put it in our processor, and John Simmons came on, and the first thing he said was, not another Kelly communication station. We played Walk Into the Jungle, and that was the weekend of pirate radio.
Yes, and it is probably still to this day one of the greatest Peoria radio stories.
It was a phenomenal weekend. We had one of the TV stations with us, I think 19. Someone caught wind or came by the office to see and notice that we were dressed differently and thought, these guys are going somewhere. And we're like, we can't stop you if you come along. So they had video of us pulling the plugs, and that was a great weekend. And then we took the station back and ran it for another year. And with phenomenal ratings. It was lightning in a bottle because it had been beaten down so bad, and we just did a free-for-all. I was the program director, and I told my guys, I said, here's the playlist. Please consider this to be a suggestion. Quite frankly, do what you like. I want my
play Doc Severinsen at 10.
I want my night guy having, I want my night guy to bring some bands in and put them on the air. I said, well, what else are we going to do? Let's just do it. And I did middays just for fun. I did what we called the 10 o'clock office block, where you fax any 3 songs to me, and I'll play them. And we wound up playing "Strokin'" by Clarence Carter, a lot of stuff that I think I pushed everybody over the edge with Garth Brooks one day, "Friends in Low Places." But you know what? The entire audience of CT at the time had been in bars. They sang that song. They were drunk. It fit. So, but we did phenomenally well for that year, and then sold it again. And now it's part of another group in town now. They're X Rock or whatever. I seldom ever drop by to see what they're doing. But how things have changed. But yeah, I'm basically the chief engineer for every station that I've ever worked for, and I'm an assistant engineer to every other station in town based on their need at the time.
Right.
You need something, I'll be there. I'm currently working on a project for GLT and WCBU as they are joining together. I've been doing some engineering work for them. Unfortunately, my back is causing me some issues, so I'm not been able to do as much as I want to do. But I take care of about 45 radio stations as far north as Sterling and Kewanee, Galesburg, Macomb, Big Circle, Effingham to the south, Champaign-Urbana. So I do a lot of traveling, a lot of work, a lot of consulting.
Well, I told you this would go fast. We're out of time.
Oh, gee.
But we'll have you back.
There were so many stories I wanted to tell.
I know. When you're feeling better, especially, we'll have you back. My guest has been Wayne R. Miller, legendary Peoria radio guy. Thanks to him for being here. Thanks to you for watching. Remember, you can catch this on Peoria Life's web portal, Facebook, YouTube, and Peoria TV, channel 17 on the i3 broadband system. I'm Scott Wheeler from Super Hits WIRL, and thanks for watching Airplay.
PeoriaLife.com